I recently went down a rabbit hole that started with a video about a weird Islamic story, then a Christian man who thinks almost everything is a woke conspiracy, and finally it ended with this, a parody Islamic pamphlet about homophobia. How the heck did we get here? Who's behind this deceptive website? And what's all this talk about homosexuality?
So who is gay?
My name is Apostate Aladdin. I make videos and live streams discussing Islam critically, and I'm joined today by genetically modified skeptic, aka the most lovable ex-Christian on YouTube. Drew, say something.
Hey guys, happy to be here. Yeah, I make videos about leaving Christianity, about religion in general, and actually about the confluence of religion and politics in the United States, aka Christian nationalism.
You see how I collaborate with people who fight and vote against Christian nationalism, not support it? Very demure, very mindful. So come embark with us on this wild, wild journey, but first hit that like button or else I'll replace Drew with a Bible thumper. No, I won't actually do that. Or will I? No, I'm just kidding. Or am I? And make sure to stick around till the end because I'm saving the juiciest expose for last. It's about what's in the thumbnail. So let's take it from the top. I came across this video by a man called David Wood where he claims that Prophet Muhammad was, how do I put this? Doing haram stuff with the boys, bouncing on the devil's pogo stick. In other words, he was banging a bunch of dudes while his friend watched. Weird, I know, but that's not the scoop here. We'll get back to the hadith in a second. Drew, are you familiar with this David guy?
I am familiar with David Wood, yes.
Unfortunately, so am I.
And we can see how AP treats actual Palestinians on his channel.
David says that Christianity saved him from his violent and manipulative tendencies, and that he's been on a mission to spread the good word ever since, with a loud and particular tone that you either love or you hate.
Sounds like her problem to me, haha! Ha ha! You see?
And instead of pursuing a career in voice acting, he live streams for hours on end in a holy crusade against Islam. Some of his criticisms are legitimate. Most people, for example, would agree that child marriage is abhorrent and that slavery is immoral. Yet he never turns his sharp critical mind against the scripture he claims to believe in. I'm intimately familiar with Islam, not Christianity, but you are. So do you have any idea as to why many Christians like David are so focused on Islam?
Islam is the biggest competitor with Christianity, not just for people's souls, but for political power across the world. So there are certain Christians like David who think that Christianity should be the most influential thing in the world, and sometimes that means controlling governments. Whereas there are certain Muslims who think the same thing about Islam. So David would obviously see those folks as a big threat.
Also, to play Jesus advocate here, many Christians do honestly want to convert people to save their souls, and I suspect that it's easier to convert a religious person than an atheist. Drew, have you had any experience trying to convert people?
Yeah. I actually thought of going into a career doing missionary work through very psychologically manipulative counseling services. So yes. And I should also say that I'm the first in 4 generations of men in my family not to be a full-time Christian missionary. So yeah, I've been there.
And now you're doing this.
Well. How the turntables...
Yeah, some people say I'm doing atheist missionary work, but I'm not actually trying to convert anybody to be an atheist. I don't care. I just want people to be more educated.
That's fair. And I do wonder if Christian you and Muslim me would have met, how that conversation would have went and whether we would have been friends at the time.
There's a lot lower likelihood that we would have actually liked each other.
I'd like to think that we still would have. Anyway, it's also worth mentioning that a lot of Muslim apologists and da'wah men try to debunk Christianity to give Islam more credibility, as it's supposed to be a revision of the corrupted revelation sent from the same God. So it makes sense that the promoters of these two religions are constantly bickering, like a pair of competitive siblings in a cutthroat family. Anyway, David Wood cited a video by this man, Raymond Ibrahim, who has a, let's say, interesting Wikipedia page. He also makes anti-Islam videos and writings almost exclusively. So I went further down the rabbit hole through his list of articles, and I thought it might be illuminating to go through one together. Relatively recently, discoveries have been made of unmarked graves of Canada's Indigenous people who were the victims of the Catholic Church and the federal government's forced residential schools. In the wake of those discoveries, many churches were burned down by vigilantes, presumably as late retaliation for the crimes they got away with. I'm not advocating for that, I'm just reporting what happened.
Based on our investigation, we found 33 churches in Canada which had been fully lost to fire since May 2021. More than double the number from the previous 2 years, and only 2 were ruled accidental. 9 of the fires led to arson charges, 12 people in total. At least 6 are from the Indigenous communities where the churches were burned. 5 have yet to face trial. A local youth was convicted in this fire on the Kihiwan Cree Nation in Alberta.
Somehow, in this article, Raymond Ibrahim blames Muslims and Indians for the arson, not Native American Indians, India Indians. If you can guess how he got there, I'll give you $100.
Indians are more likely to be Muslims than Native Americans?
Nope, that's wrong. And that's great because I can't afford to give you $100. He cites a tweet by Harsha Walia, the then head of British Columbia's Civil Liberties Association. As a response to the news that 1,000 more graves were found and 2 churches were burned, she tweeted, "Burn it all down." And Raymond claims that she's a Punjabi Indian born and raised in Bahrain, which is why it made sense that she'd say burn it all down, because Muslims and Indians in other countries have burned churches and persecuted Christians. There is nothing to indicate that the arsonists in Canada had anything to do with Islam. I don't think she's even a Muslim.
I'm just reeling from the fact that he's more mad about these buildings being burnt down than, children being massacred.
Because to him, it fits the persecution narrative, and he's not really as concerned about the crimes of the church. It actually gets much worse. He downplays and questions whether the graves were for children, whether they were that many, whether they died of natural causes or malicious reasons, and he does this thing where he references other opinion pieces by Christians as sources. In this referenced article, the author tries to sow doubts about the validity and severity of any of these reports, which seems to be a version of residential school denialism. And this part is really ironic. She cites a tweet by J.J. McCullough. You're more familiar with him than I am, but this seemed out of place to me.
JJ is a guy who is a little bit more of a controversial figure in Canada, but especially for the US, he's very much a moderate. I would say big L liberal.
JJ criticized in a tweet the lack of clarity in the reporting about the discovery, and that the words used could imply that the bodies were exhumed when that wasn't the method used. But the author cites him to sow distrust and make the point that we can't know the truth. And she continues to show a general distrust of the science behind all this.
It's weird he'd be cited like this because I've talked to JJ about this in person, actually, and know for a fact that he is of the opinion that this was a crime perpetrated by the collaboration of the Canadian government and the Catholic Church. So he's not casting doubt on the fact that this actually happened.
We could spend an hour on each of these articles, but we won't. So let's jump to this cited source where a Christian Canadian news YouTube channel says the following in part of the video.
And yet, there was this weird universal assumption in the media that the discovery of these graves was somehow evidence of Canada's Holocaust, and that these children had been deliberately killed in some kind of a genocide. Look, genocide requires intent. It requires a concerted and systematic effort to conduct mass murder and eliminate an entire race of people. Canada's residential schools, however misguided, had the intent of educating children, of assimilating them into the broader Canadian population, and ultimately of lifting children out of poverty. The policy was wrong, clearly. It was flawed, and it resulted in much harm. But there are a few orders of magnitude that separate the misguided intent of Catholic priests, nuns, and Canadian government officials versus those of Nazi soldiers in the Second World War.
You notice the passive language? They were misguided. It was flawed. The policy resulted in.
The policy was wrong, clearly. It was flawed, and it resulted in much harm.
They're just trying to absolve anyone of responsibility.
Next, the sixth point where the media gets this story completely wrong. It's possible that the graves that we're talking about are not even necessarily unmarked graves. Did you see this story in Global News over the weekend? The headline reads, "We knew it was there. Former BC chief says unmarked graves near Cranbrook need more context."
Okay, we knew that they were there. That makes it worse, doesn't it? We knew that all of these kids' graves were there the whole time. And we weren't, accounting for this atrocity until someone else found out about it? How does that make it better?
They're relying on the possibility that they weren't unmarked graves. They're looking for any way to make you doubt instead of proving that it's not the case.
It's possible that the graves that we're talking about are not even necessarily unmarked graves.
What's weird is that this sounds to me indistinguishable from Islamic apologetics about Muhammad's wars or his endorsement of human trafficking and slavery.
This is also indistinguishable from how a lot of people read white supremacists talk about slavery. Oh, slaves were taught skills. They were brought from an impoverished place to a place with lots of opportunity.
And ultimately of lifting children out of poverty.
And, that there were good relationships between the slave masters and the enslaved people. It's not really a big deal. And the fact that, bad slave masters existed doesn't mean that this whole system was always bad. No, these children were put into an assimilation process that involved stripping them of any family ties, shaving their heads, brutalizing them, and indoctrinating them into a system that they had absolutely no connection to, and which basically served the regime of the people that were in power. They were being created into a version of slaves in their time. And a lot of them died because doing this is extraordinarily brutal.
It's just trying to put a spin on things to avoid admitting that Christian institutions have ever done anything wrong. And like I said, I've heard that from Islamic apologists, but I didn't expect it to be so blatant on the Christian side too.
Look, genocide requires intent.
That's enough of his articles for today. Let's hear the man speak. Here's a short I think you'll find peculiar.
Identifying the negative elements of an ideology and condemning it accordingly is not so difficult. We've already done so with Nazism and other ideologies and cults. And we know the difference between those who follow such supremacist ideologies, the bad guys, and those who find themselves as casual, uncommitted members, good or neutral people. In saner times, when common sense could vent and breathe, this analogy would have been deemed superfluous. In our times, however, where lots of woke garbage is disseminated far and wide, common sense must be methodically spelled out, as I am doing here now. Yes, an ideology, religion can be accepted as bad, and no, many of its adherents need not be bad. This, I submit to you, is the most objective way to understand the relationship between Islam as a body of teachings and Muslims as individual people. The religion is inherently divisive, intolerant, violent, and supremacist, as are all those Muslims who follow it, though obviously not every single one of them does.
I will say this is something that I actually used to believe because I listened to people like Sam Harris and followed his word on this kind of religiously. Now I see this as a version of religious essentialism, that there is one true form, one true essence of a given religion, and that it can be characterized as such and such a thing, and that if people don't follow that version of that religion, then they don't really follow the religion at all. So I would say that, like, yeah, there are absolutely, undeniably, forms of Islam that can be all those things, but I would not say that people who don't follow all the worst parts of Islam are necessarily not true Muslims. I think that Islam is as flexible as any other ideology, and the same goes for Christianity.
I do agree with him on the point that Islam has a lot of intolerance baked into it, but I find it hypocritical that he found it apt to make an analogy to Nazism when he is a Trump supporter and he presumably doesn't think that disappearing people into unmarked vans and sending them to concentration camps in another country is close to Nazism. So the hypocrisy is kind of hard to get past.
Also, can I just say, the Nazis were Christian, and the AfD, the modern day Nazi party, is Christian. They've always been Christians.
But that's not true Christianity.
Which is what a bunch of Muslims say when they're trying to deny that terrorism ever comes out of Islamic communities.
And did you notice how he said woke garbage and it was just gays?
In our times, however, where lots of woke garbage is disseminated far and wide.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
So woke garbage is when gay.
Yeah, also when evolution, because there's a weird March of Progress image going on there. So believing in, actual science and doing disco and being gay, those are all woke things. And saying that you're not supposed to do any of those things is absolutely not a supremacist ideology at all. To say that gay people are somehow inferior or don't deserve rights, that's not supremacist because it's just Christian.
This is an AI-generated image, so I expect there to be a bunch of garbage in the background, but I'm not even sure if he's against evolution with this diagram or if he's saying that we're regressing now because of woke. But either way, it's kind of hard to take him seriously. And there's always this dishonest language, like common sense, woke, family values. Could this be Christian Taqiyya? No, we didn't get to that part yet. Seriously though, just tell us what you mean. Is common sense not being gay? Unless it's in secret with a dash of shame and hypocrisy and a dollop of abuse, because that is the Christian way. Okay, let's ascend back up the rabbit hole and address the original video. In it, Raymond chose this bizarre hadith. Hadiths are narrations by and about Muhammad, which many Muslims believe in depending on the degree of authenticity, and some ignore them altogether or selectively dismiss the problematic ones. This one seems to be authentic, and apologies in advance, but you'll have to listen to some sexually charged language. This is going to get weird, so brace yourself.
Abdullah begins by telling us that Muhammad called on him to accompany him on a trip into the desert. When they reached a certain place and night had fallen, Muhammad made a line in the sand, most likely a circle, and told Abdullah, quote, "Stay behind this line and do not cross it, for if you do, you will die." Muhammad then left his startled companion and walked into the desert night, about the distance of a hurled stone, says Abdullah. Before long, our narrator saw a group of men, he does not specify how many, who, quote, appeared to be al-Zutt. He describes them as, quote, tall, lean, and naked. Other Islamic sources say these Zutt were a black-skinned people, and we'll get into that later. After describing them, Abdullah goes on, and here's the problematic part, to say, quote, "They went to and began to ride the Prophet of Allah." Literally, that's what the Arabic says. These tall, black, naked men rode Muhammad. The Arabic word yarkabun, which I will presently discuss, can also be translated as mounted. And they did this all night long, says Abdullah. During which time they would also come and circle around and try to reach him, but they were prevented, apparently from the line of protection Muhammad had drawn in the sand for his companion. Abdullah concludes his narration, quote, "I was extremely terrified by them, so I sat down. With the coming of dawn, they began to depart. Then the Prophet of Allah returned, slowly and in pain, from that which they did while riding him."
So did Raymond demolish Islam for you yet?
I mean, I'm not sure if his interpretations are all right, but like maybe this is evidence, maybe, that there was some gay stuff happening, but no, that doesn't demolish Islam.
See, the focus here is that Muhammad supposedly had sex with a bunch of men. That's according to Raymond's interpretation of the hadith and the fishy website that he cites. Wink, wink. The men were riding Muhammad, yarkabun. I wanted to check for myself, so I looked up the hadith and I found the same narration on durar.net. And the definition of that word yarkabun seems to be crowding and approaching, though it can be used in other contexts to mean riding in a sexual way. I also found another variant of the hadith which is a weaker degree of authenticity and uses a different word altogether that has nothing to do with riding in any way, but just approaching. But let's play devil's advocate. We could assume that the Islamic website's definition of the word is dishonest to cover up the incriminating meaning. But then let's finish that thought to its conclusion. Say Muhammad was engaging sexually with these men. What was his friend up to?
It's also interesting to note that when al-Zutt begins circling and trying to reach our terrified narrator, Abdullah, his first instinct was to sit down. Was he trying to hide and protect that one part of his body, which these naked men were apparently trying to access? That is his bottom, by sitting down. Again, as I think you can see, this hadith is scandalous. Not the sort of thing you'd expect people who want to fabricate an honorable prophet would make up. Nor, I can assure you, was such a deed, done hidden in the desert night, deemed normal or acceptable among the Arabs of Muhammad's time.
So let me get this straight. Raymond believes that Muhammad is a false prophet, just a regular man with no magic powers or divine intervention, but somehow the line in the sand works as a force field.
They would also come and circle around and try to reach him, but they were prevented, apparently from the line of protection Muhammad had drawn in the sand for his companion.
I just can't get over the fact that he's reaching so far as to say sitting down is an act of covering one's butt, which proves that you're gay. He's sitting down right now. What does that prove there, Raymond? What are you trying to prevent, huh?
No, I think he meant that his friend sat down to prevent the men from getting to him.
Was he trying to hide and protect that one part of his body, which these naked men were apparently trying to access? That is his bottom.
And the Islamic sources depict these men as a savage tribe, or some even poorly argue that they may have been possessed by jinn. So in this interpretation, what's stopping a savage, sexually charged man from assaulting Muhammad's friend is that he sat down behind a magic line. It makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. I, of course, disavow the imprecise and racist rhetoric in the Islamic sources, which he gets into a little bit. I'm just trying to follow Raymond's line of thought here. The way I understand this bizarre hadith is that Muhammad is claimed to have engaged in some spiritual exorcism-type fight with these evil entities, and then the angels came down to commend him on a job well done. Do I believe that any of that really happened? Fuck no. But I believe that this is the fantastical story that Muslims were telling.
As I'm sure Raymond is aware, there's actually much better arguments and historical interpretations of queerness in the Bible than in the Quran or in the Hadith. David, the man who was called the man after God's own heart, he was, one of the original kings of Israel. Of course, this is mythical. He was said to love Jonathan better than the love of women. They were very close. And actual scholars, respected non-sectarian scholars of the Bible and of just Hebrew religion in general, believe that they may well have been bisexual. They may have had sexual contact with each other.
How can I be homophobic? My boyfriend's gay.
And then they went and separated and married women later, but this doesn't mean that they weren't doing some gay stuff. That has been something that's been well known in the Bible forever. Yeah, it's in the Old Testament, but the New Testament cites David and his exploits constantly. So if we want to talk about sus gay behavior as if that's some kind of real problem, I think Raymond needs to look at his own book.
So what you're saying is David might be gay or bi. Not this David, that David.
Yeah, David. However you want to interpret that, sure.
But even if he was, that is not why you're not a Christian anymore, I'm assuming.
No, it has nothing to do with it. I don't think there's anything wrong with being gay, and so, like, if I thought that there was gay characters in the Bible, why would that matter?
So, gayness aside, there are plenty of oddities in the hadith. One that comes to mind is when Muhammad claimed to have fought and overpowered the jinn, and he had half a mind to tie him up and show everybody, but of course he had to let the jinn go. Muhammad was such an ethical jinn hunter that he practiced catch and release. Do you know of any similar far-fetched stories from Christianity or its apostles?
Oh, yeah. The apostle stories get pretty wacky, but I'll just say that Jesus was an exorcist. Some of his greatest miracles were exorcisms. You know, they found a man in a graveyard, and he said that he had a bunch of demons in him, and he bowed down before Jesus, and Jesus was going to cast out the demons, and the demons said, please don't just send us away, send us into that crowd of pigs, and we would prefer that. So Jesus does that? Instead of just saying, you know, kindly f*** off, he sends them into the requested host. And the pigs all run off a cliff, and I'm assuming that the demons are not still in the pigs, so that means they just left. The story doesn't really make much sense if the demons didn't want to just be floating free. And also, Jesus didn't just say, be gone. He actually did something that the demons wanted from him. So it's pretty different than how a lot of people picture or conceptualize exorcism today, the stuff that's actually biblical.
I wonder what Raymond and David would think of a narration like that, and if that is enough for them to sow doubt in their religion. I guess we'll have to wait and find out. It's funny how all these supernatural stories only happen with no evidence or witnesses or recordings. It's kind of like saying, my girlfriend's real, she just goes to another school. So what do you think Raymond's criticism boils down to in this video?
Being gay is bad, and maybe even being gay cast doubt on your credibility as a human being, or people that believe that being gay is okay might cast doubt on a person's credibility, and so Islam can't be good and perfect and true because gay.
You are gay.
Well, that's certainly a big part of it, and it's something that David takes and runs with on his channel. But let's listen to his thesis.
So there you have it. Here is a perfect example of why the hadith should not be so quickly dismissed as later forgeries meant to present an honorable prophet. And here is a perfect example of how the hadith is being used as a powerful weapon against Islam.
I don't think this is a good example of a hadith being a powerful weapon against Islam. This is an example of Christians trying to use their common grounds of homophobia to win one over on Muslims, and they're not really succeeding at that, because this is mostly entertainment for Christians. This is like a snake oil salesman telling you to buy his product instead because his snake is totally into women, if you know what I mean. So in summary, haha, Muhammad is gay. The criticism isn't that he's a hypocrite for being bisexual while forbidding it on his followers. It's just that he takes it up the butt. Now, this is the kind of hard-hitting critique that Christians bring to the table. Keep it up, guys. You're so close to defeating Islam. By the way, Drew, were you a homophobe when you were a believer?
Yeah, I mean, I would say so. In the way that I definitely supported systemic homophobia, right? Like supporting systems of homophobia. Calling people slurs or something? No, but that's not the only way to be homophobic.
That's fair. And I'm glad that you had a chance to revise your beliefs, and I'm assuming you're no longer homophobic.
I would hope not.
When I was a Muslim, I definitely was homophobic. Not in a combative way, but I mostly kept it to myself. One time a friend asked me what I think of gay people, and I said that I don't care what they do. I just feel uncomfortable if a man were to look at me with lust. And immediately it hit me that he was about to come out to me. So I apologized to him, and I told him that it's something I'm working on, and he was really understanding about it. And I also realized that's how women must feel so often, that a creepy man is looking at them with lust, which is why I never gawk at women unless it's my boo. Shout out to my partner. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. We could watch David Wood's video about this, but we're not going to do that. I wouldn't want to subject you to that reiterated slop anyway. I love you guys. I wouldn't hurt you like that. We're almost at the Christian Taqiyya section of this video, but first, what the heck is a taqiyya?
We have something like that in Texas. It actually comes from Mexico. They're little rolled pieces of tortilla with chili powder on the outside. They're really crunchy and spicy. You might have actually had some when you were here once with me.
No, not takis, taqiyya.
Yeah, I once made a video about this with Ali Rizvi, and the sum of that video was basically most Muslims actually aren't really familiar with taqiyya because it's not something they're actually taught. I, as a Christian, was familiar with this, though, because I was taught that Islam instructs Muslims to lie about anything and everything that they want in order to put forth or push forward the kingdom of Islam.
And why did you, an ex-Christian, feel compelled to make a video about it?
There's no point in criticism if it's inaccurate. I mean, we don't need to be just lying about Islam in order to critique it in a meaningful way. In fact, if we do lie about it or spread misinformation about it in the process of critiquing it, I think we're far less effective and more likely to just spread, hatred of people for no reason.
I have yet to meet a single Muslim or ex-Muslim who was ever taught anything about taqiyya in name or in practice. The closest I've ever heard is that I'm allowed to say I'm not Muslim to avoid persecution. But that's the antithesis of the Christian position in America, isn't it?
Oh, God, yeah. No, I was taught as a child that if a school shooter, which happens all the time in the United States, ever came to school and put a gun to my head and said, "Do you believe in God?" Or alternatively, they said, "Deny God and I'll save your life," I was supposed to face them and say, "No, I believe in God," and then have my brains presumably blown out. Yeah, it's a ridiculous and cruel thing that conservative evangelical Christian children are taught. Although I'll say, not all Christians actually think that that's okay. There's a lot of Christians in the United States and elsewhere who think that that is batshit crazy to teach kids.
That is really sad. Instead of fantasizing about happy thoughts and a long life, they wanted you to fantasize about persecution and death. I hate it when religions make their followers value a hypothetical afterlife more than the one life we know that we have. Anyway, taqiyya. It is such an insidious and unfalsifiable concept because by definition, a Muslim is expected to deny it. Christians sometimes accuse me of taqiyya because my criticism of Islam is fairer than they'd like it to be, even though I don't believe. But they say that once a Muslim, always a Muslim, which leads me to believe that sometimes the religious feud is cloaking a different kind of bigotry.
Funny enough, in the comment section of my video about this subject, I was actually called a secret Muslim because once a Muslim, always a Muslim, and that my entire career and all of my stories about growing up in Texas, maybe even my slight Texan accent, was all a ploy to convert a bunch of atheists to Islam. Like, I was a sleeper Muslim because I made this video. And the justification was, can you guess?
Not at all.
It's just, this is what Islam does. This is what it teaches you. It's taqiyya.
Well, when's phase 2 going to start? Because you're doing this all wrong. I don't think people are going to join Islam by watching your channel.
The build-up has been way too long. I've deconverted probably too many people to be able to make up for it.
Anyway, Raymond, Ibrahim, David Wood, and many of his Christian orbiters keep parroting that taqiyya is a real thing that Muslims believe in but will not admit. And Raymond has written a lot about it and affirms that all you and I are saying are false apologetics and, in a sense, taqiyya. So this term essentially means lying for the ultimate goal and that the ends justify the means. Keep that in mind because it is finally time. Drew, do you have the time?
I do. It's Christian Taqiyya time.
It is time for the final nook in the seemingly never-ending rabbit hole. Raymond Ibrahim cited this link as the source of the problematic hadith provided by JNDOC, another Christian anti-Islam channel. And as soon as I clicked it, I knew something was off. This is a real Islamic website. This is a suspicious one. Does anything look odd to you?
I'm not really sure. I don't know if I'm familiar enough with these websites to know. What's going on?
First of all, there's the design of the website. It's kind of too simple. And then there's the highlighting of the suspicious word, conveniently, and the fact that the link could fool someone into thinking that this is the sunnah.com website, not sunnah2.com. In cybersecurity terms, that is called phishing. My BS detector immediately went off. I could smell the church incense and I didn't know why. So I went to the homepage, sunnah2.com. Let's look at that together. But first, a disclaimer. If you're going to check out this website, make sure to use a VPN and take safety precautions because I don't know who's running it and what they're doing with the logged information. On the homepage, you see it says Islamic Library Sunnah 2 Rabbi Zidni Ilman, which is an Arabic supplication that means God increase my knowledge. And then we look at the search bar over here, and there's already some suggested topics.
I will say that seeing women, jihad, and Jews all there makes me smell the incense a little bit, because I know what Christian anti-Islam propaganda looks like, and it's pretty much always about jihad and Jews and women.
So if we click the first link, Islam Wow, it says, have fun while learning more about Islam. Random selections of hadith, tafsir, and fiqh. Fiqh is jurisprudence. It has the short and sweet and the scholarly options. This one says in Arabic, lil busata, which kind of translates to for the simple people or the simpletons, I think, which makes me think that's part of the joke that they're running. This one's for the mujtahideen, for, I guess, the scholarly people, or the people who want to go the extra mile. If you click on either of these links, you get served a random hadith or a verse or a scholar's opinion. This one says, Ibn Sirin said, it is good to be gentle except in 3 things: when you eat pomegranates, when you eat melons, and when you have sex. That is not the Prophet or any of his companions, so this might just be some random scholar. And I'm not even sure if this is the worst one. Is he just a little kinky with it?
I mean, is it always bad to actually, do the deed with a little more gusto? Not necessarily.
Yeah, so the whole point is to serve you a hadith or an opinion or a verse that would shock you, but unfortunately, a lot of them are so poorly curated that sometimes it's not even that bad, or sometimes it's just some scholar's opinion. It's not really canon in any way. And if you click on this link, you'll be taken to a website called arnabmubashir.com, which is Arabic for the evangelical bunny. Can you take a guess as to who's evangelical? We're not saying anything, but if you click on one of the links, you'll be taken to a bunch of Islamic books, allegedly, that are actually yet another collection of supposedly bad verses and opinions and hadiths and so on. And there's a link that takes you to a collection of flyers that are, again, confusingly titled. This one, titled The Affectionate Prophet, supposedly shows a bunch of instances of Muhammad being a little sus. But also, there's another pamphlet that shows all the homophobia in Islam. So I'm not really sure, is the criticism that he's gay or he's homophobic? And there's also a YouTube channel associated with this that's essentially doing the same thing. Oh, and there's a related website called Mormonism Wow. Now, why would someone go through all that effort to dunk on Islam and Mormonism but skip over mainstream Christianity? Who gains the benefit from that?
Who sees both Islam and Mormonism as their primary competitors, especially Mormonism? Where do you think these people could be located? And what could their religion be? I wonder.
We're not saying anything, but I'm not even sure if this is meant to trick a believer into clicking and shocking them into leaving Islam, or if it's a joke that's being played on them with all the sarcasm and the subtle jabs. The connected websites aren't all consistent in their themes. And this deceptive approach is more often than not counterproductive and wouldn't actually help a Muslim think critically. People don't like being duped and mocked. And here the joke isn't just about the scripture, but about the Muslim who fell for the website. And I don't object to compiling all the problematic scripture in one place. I object to the lack of transparency. A good example of a trustworthy website is Wiki Islam, which is run by the Ex-Muslims of North America. It is a lot more detailed and referenced and doesn't pretend to be something it's not. But when I needed it years ago, I distrusted it because I was paranoid that it was another one of these Christian websites with ulterior motives. Such deceptive websites reaffirm the distrust and conspiracy theories, and they send the questioning believer back deeper into religious confusion and desperation. I couldn't trust an unknown person with a possible religious agenda to translate and curate scripture for me, and I sure as wouldn't trust any of these charlatans if I was still a believer. Would you have trusted a da'wah man's critique of Christianity?
No way. Not at all.
And I feel bad for Muslims who don't speak Arabic because on one hand, there's sunnah.com that sometimes has apologetic translations that don't exactly convey the real meaning. And on the other hand, there are examples of websites like these that have a intentionally terrible translation to just score points against Islam. So who do they trust? To be clear, I don't know for a fact that Christians are behind this website, but most mentions I see of it on the internet are in Christian circles, like Sam Shamaun, Christian Prince, David Wood, and so on. And it does occasionally make its way out to the non-theistic and ex-Muslim spaces, but I suspect that's where it begins. Is that a coincidence? Perhaps, but I find it difficult to believe that none of the Christian apologists sharing these websites are aware of its real design and intention. But there is a chance that they are unaware, in which case they're guilty of being superficial and tunnel-visioned in their research. And I never want to hear again that these people are excellent at spotting the truth from the lies or whatever it is. They're either being deceptive to achieve a goal, hence Christian Taqiyya, or they're digging for the sake of finding dirt rather than finding the truth.
There are totally Christians who will engage with non-believers, with people of other religions in good faith. They genuinely believe their thing, their religion, and they want to convert you because they care about you. It's a thing. That's a real thing. But you're not usually going to find them having big, popular, especially explosively popular and growing platforms on the internet, because the kind of genuine ministry and kindness and humanity that you have to show in order to foster a kind of real relationship that maybe leads to a conversion experience that is not toxic or based on deception, it's just not that marketable. I mean, I know from my own space that the things that sell really, really well are sensationalistic. They're just bashing Christians. They're saying that people that believe in God are stupid, and that atheists are superior. That's what sells well. Anger, vitriol, hatred sells well. And the same goes for circles that include Christians, that include Muslims, that include ex-Muslims. Unfortunately, the cream does not rise to the top. Usually the shit rises to the top.
This is really a shame because, as you said, the bad faith crowd are the most popular in every domain. And this dishonesty and deception, or perhaps unhinged and blinding obsession, this is a discredit to the real causes that someone like Raymond advocates for. Like, for example, the persecution of Christians in the Middle East, which I'm sure he's personally hurt by. I understand that he might have generational trauma and pain because of how marginalized his people were in their country of origin. But his conspiracy theories and homophobia hurt his credibility outside of his Christian circles. And if you look at history, time and time again, religious and ideological clashes have resulted in this persecution of whoever happens to be the minority. So in the grand scheme of things, Christians are not uniquely persecuted, and neither are Muslims. All of these totalitarian all-or-nothing ideologies have been both the oppressor and the oppressed, and they've pitted people against each other for generations. So I hope that we can shed as much poor epistemology and tribalism as possible so we can focus on coexisting and thriving, because that is the real mission. So Drew, what would you say to those who claim that Islam is the biggest threat to humanity and that Christianity is harmless and purely about love?
I would just say learn history, and also maybe understand some religious studies theory a little bit to understand the issues with applying this, frankly, theological framework to understanding religion that is religious essentialism. Christianity can be horrible and disgusting and is taking over the US government, which is the largest nuclear power in the world right now. So there are things to worry about there. And that's not to downplay that there are really serious things coming out of Islamic countries and Islamic communities now as well. We do need to understand things complexly, or else we are never going to be able to find a way to peacefully exist or to even criticize bad ideas in an effective way.
I completely agree, but I gotta say that scripturally, on average, Islam is more focused on hell and punishment than on love. And Jesus was a peaceful man while Muhammad participated in a bunch of wars. Some would call him a warlord. So Christianity does have that great PR angle going for it. And Islam is scripturally a lot more political and combative due to the environment it originated in. But both religions seem to have that primordial soup of ingredients that can be used to make cults, to enforce superstition and magical thinking, and to trample on people's rights for the sake of the greater good, allegedly.
I think it's pretty common for ex-Muslims to see Christianity through rose-colored glasses because they apply this interpretive framework, which is common within Islam, to the New Testament, and they see Christianity as colored just through that. So if you look at the New Testament, yeah, there actually is no hell in the New Testament unless you are interpreting it through Christian tradition. There is some about patriarchy and domination, but there's not as much as within Islam. If you look at Christian history, if you look at tradition passed down for thousands of years within the church, you see that Christianity is just as political as Islam. It has controlled just as much, if not more, territory through politics as any caliphate. It has executed just as many people. It has persecuted just as many people. It has converted just as many people through force, through colonization. It's just that in the last few centuries, Christianity has been somewhat beaten into place by people's uprisings in secular revolutions. Will the same thing happen to Islam? Maybe, but it's important for ex-Muslims to know that you shouldn't just look at the New Testament. You should look at Christian history, including the things that we looked at in this video.
On another note, do you think that Jesus would approve of Christian Taqiyya?
I think that Jesus was pretty focused on overthrowing the Roman government, and sometimes he liked to, through omission, stretch or bend the truth. I think that the real Jesus would be shocked that the earth still exists today, or at least the governments that rule the earth still exist today. So, yes and no. He'd be surprised that David Wood is even in existence and there's such a thing as Christianity. So, yeah, he'd be pretty shocked at Christian Taqiyya, but he was known to stretch the truth in order to get away from persecution, at least.
I think he'd be shocked that people are following David Wood as if he's an extension of Jesus. That's just my personal opinion.
I will agree with that 100%.
Would you use such underhanded tactics against Christians' faith?
No, I wouldn't do that. I think that we need to be able to be straightforward and honest and present ourselves in good faith to the best of our abilities so that we can have honest human connection. I don't really care about disrupting somebody's faith necessarily or converting them to atheism. I care about having a real human connection in order for us to ultimately foster some kind of peace through religious conflict. So of course I'm going to prioritize honesty over confusion and conversion like this.
Wow. Look at you being more Christ-like than the guy with the ministry, or than Christ himself. I bet if you had no moral compass, you too could swindle a bunch of people out of their hard-earned money.
Yeah, I would probably do it by posing in front of tanks in Israel.
Money, please! My money.
I mean, if these guys have spent a fraction of the time they put into this anti-Islam crusade on thinking critically about their own scripture, they wouldn't still be believers. Or at least they'd be a very different kind of believer. I think this anti-Islam stuff serves as a distraction to keep Christians from thinking too critically about their own far-fetched stories. So to wrap this up, let's answer the question, are Christians lying to Muslims?
I would say yes.
I think that some of them are, especially by making taqiyya accusations and sharing deceptive websites. And some of them are lying to everyone, as apologists and preachers of both religions tend to do. But at the end of the day, this is just a catchy title. Unlike these apologists, I'm not accusing all Christians of systemically lying and deceiving. Maybe just the ones that stand to gain popularity and money from it. Thank you so much to Drew for joining me today. If you'd like to check out his channel, which you should, links are in the description below. And thank you to the Discord server members who helped me go down this rabbit hole and helped me with all the research. And thanks to my supporters, because I genuinely could not do this without you. I have no sponsors. You guys are my sponsors. And as always, think critically and think for yourself. And consider watching one of these videos next.